I was sipping my coffee, enjoying the calmness of my property, when something unusual caught my eye. A long line of SUVs, campers, and regular cars was moving down my private gravel road, kicking up dust with every turn. I thought I was imagining it at first, but the noise was real. People were getting out of their cars, stretching, yawning as if they had arrived at a holiday spot. Some were pulling out tents, others were unloading coolers, and a few were already walking around, looking for the perfect spot to set up. I stood there, still holding my mug, completely confused. What on earth was going on? Then I saw her, Karen, the HOA leader, clipboard in hand, strutting toward me like a military commander. Her bob haircut bounced with every step, and her smug expression was just as familiar as it was irritating. I sighed, setting my coffee down before I ended up tossing it in frustration. I walked toward the crowd, which was now hammering tent pegs into the earth, setting up chairs, and even laying out sleeping bags like this was some sort of campground. "Morning, neighbor," Karen called out, her smile as fake as ever. "Thanks so much for letting us use your land for the HOA's annual camping trip." I blinked. "What?" She waved her hand, brushing off my confusion. "Oh, don't be silly. I told the HOA we needed a community retreat, and your land is the perfect spot. It's secluded, peaceful, and you don't seem to be using it for anything important." I clenched my fists. "Karen, this is my property. I didn't give anyone permission to be here." Her smile was still in place, but now it looked more like a patronizing grin. "Well, technically, the HOA decided that this would be a great spot for our outdoor bonding experience. And since you're part of the neighborhood—" "I'm not part of the HOA." I cut her off, my tone sharp. Her smile faltered for a second, but quickly returned. "You should be, and honestly, you should be happy we're including you. It's just for one weekend." "Happy?" I scanned the scene. Someone had already started a fire pit. Kids were running around, and a guy was trying to hang a hammock between two of my trees. "This is trespassing," I said, my voice tight with restraint. "Tell everyone to leave." "Now." Karen laughed. "Oh, come on. It's just camping. We're all neighbors here." "Camping? On my land? With all these people here, without permission?" Just then, a shrill scream cut through the air. A teenage girl had stepped right into a pile of cow manure. "Ugh, gross. There's poop everywhere," she shrieked, hopping on one foot. Her mother gasped. "Wait, this isn't a cleaned-up campsite." Karen hesitated. "Well, no, technically not." "Wait, no bathrooms?" Another voice called out, horrified. A man in a loud Hawaiian shirt sniffed the air. "What is that smell?" I couldn't help but hold back a smirk. This was no pristine campground. It was raw, untouched land, full of the messes nature throws at you. Karen, however, didn't back down. She put her hands on her hips and gave me a stern look. "Look," she said, "we planned this out. People took time off work. Some even brought RVs. We can't just cancel now." "Not my problem," I said flatly. She glared at me like I was ruining her day. "Well, since the HOA agreed." "For the last time, Karen," I snapped, "the HOA has no authority over my land. You and your guests are trespassing." A murmur ran through the crowd. Some people were starting to look uncomfortable, realizing they might not be here legally. But Karen wasn't ready to back down. Her lips pressed together in frustration. "Well, if you're going to be so unreasonable, maybe we should vote on it," she said. I stared at her, completely stunned. "A vote? You think you could just vote to take over my land?" She lifted her chin, proud as ever. "It's a democracy, isn't it?" I ran a hand through my hair, frustrated. "Fine. If you want to treat this like some sort of democratic process, let me show you something." I reached for my phone and dialed a number quickly. "It's time," I said before hanging up. Karen raised an eyebrow. "Time for—" Suddenly, a loud, deep growl echoed from behind the barn. 6 massive dogs appeared, each one powerful and imposing. Their sleek, black coats shone under the sun, and their sharp eyes locked onto the crowd with a fierce intensity. The onlookers froze. Someone dropped their bag of marshmallows. "Are those friendly?" a woman whispered, stepping behind her husband. I smirked. "Depends." The largest dog, a Belgian Malinois named Titan, barked, and the sound reverberated through the air. Karen's face drained of color. You can't just bring attack dogs here, she shouted. I folded my arms, unfazed. Oh, but you can bring 100 strangers onto my land? Titan took a slow step forward, followed by Shadow, a second dog whose eyes locked on Karen. Karen looked at the dog, then swallowed hard. You wouldn't, she stammered. I shrugged. They're trained not to attack unless provoked. At that moment, the so-called camping retreat dissolved into chaos. People scrambled to pack up their things, tripping over each other in their rush to leave. The man in cargo shorts abandoned his hammock. A family of 4 rushed to their minivan, practically running. Karen, now perched on the hood of an SUV, shouted, I'm calling the police. I chuckled, pulling out my own phone. Go ahead. I already did. As I finished speaking, 2 squad cars arrived, and Karen's jaw dropped in disbelief. The officers stepped out, and Karen's face turned a mix of anger and panic as she realized she had lost. The people who had been planning their weekend getaway stood frozen in awkward silence. Karen, attempting to pull herself together, marched toward the officers. Her fingers gripped the clipboard so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She took a deep breath, straightened her shoulders, and started her complaint. Thank goodness you're here, she said, flipping through her clipboard as if she were giving a report. This man has unleashed dangerous animals on us. We were just trying to have a peaceful retreat, and now he's threatening us. She pointed at me, her voice trembling in feigned distress. This is criminal behavior. Arrest him immediately. One of the officers, a tall man with a thick mustache, raised an eyebrow. He turned to me. You called about trespassers? I nodded. Yes, this is my land. I didn't give permission for anyone to be here. Now, they're treating it like a public park. And as for the dogs, I said, glancing at Karen, they're just making sure no one tries anything stupid. The other officer, a woman with a clipboard of her own, turned to Karen. Ma'am, do you have written permission to be here? Karen's face flushed a deep red, her usual confidence crumbling in the face of authority. She opened her mouth, but the words never came. She had no permission, no legal right to be there. Just an assumption that her status within the HOA meant she could trample over anyone else's boundaries without consequence. The officers exchanged a glance. The man with the mustache raised an eyebrow, clearly waiting for Karen to save herself from further embarrassment. When she didn't, he stepped forward. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask everyone to pack up and leave, he said, his tone firm but calm. You're all trespassing, and if you don't leave now, I'll have to issue citations. The crowd, which had been tense and unsure, now started to murmur in discomfort. Some of them had been caught up in Karen's enthusiasm for the idea of a community getaway. But the reality of it, the sudden shift from excitement to the realization that they were in the wrong, was settling in. The sound of zippers on tents and folding chairs being packed away echoed through the clearing. Karen, still trying to maintain some shred of dignity, shot me a final look of pure rage. But even she knew there was no fighting this. The law was on my side, and no amount of fake authority would change that. Her clipboard, which had been her weapon of choice just moments before, now looked like an empty, meaningless prop in her hands. She gritted her teeth, but there was no escape. With a sigh of frustration, Karen turned and stormed back to the SUV. This isn't over, she shouted over her shoulder. But the sound of her words was lost in the rustling of bags and the scuffling of feet as the campers, her army, dispersed. I watched as they left, some too embarrassed to meet my gaze. Karen's power play had backfired. She'd overestimated her influence and underestimated someone who knew how to stand their ground. I felt a sense of satisfaction. It wasn't just about protecting my land. It was about setting boundaries and not letting anyone push me around. The dogs, calm throughout, circled back to me, tails wagging. I patted Titan's head. Good boys, I muttered, then returned to my porch, coffee in hand. The peaceful silence I'd enjoyed before the chaos had returned, but now it felt sweeter.